Blog Talk Radio.
Archangels, ghosts, and Bigfoot. Oh my! It's just another night for Supernatural Girlz. Real stories, real answers to life's biggest supernatural mysteries. And now for another exciting interview with paranormal experts from this world and others. Psychic medium Helene Olsen and paranormal researcher Patricia Baker. Here are Supernatural Girlz.
Welcome, everyone, to another exciting episode of Supernatural Girlz. I am your host, Patricia Baker, and I am here with, once again, my incredibly fabulous co-host, my guest co-host for the evening, Patricia Kirkman. Hi, Patricia.
Well, good evening. And I love the way you talk about me.
Oh, well, it's all true stuff that I'm here to say.
It's only good because of the top hostess. That's it.
Now, this is an exciting night for us for a number of reasons. First of all, there are no thunderstorms over my head in Massachusetts and none over your head in Tucson, correct? So
that's right. Just a little cloud, but the sun's shining on the other side, so it's great.
We are. You know, last week, I must share with everybody that was listening and people maybe didn't catch the show, there was a huge lightning strike here, which knocked me right off the air. It made the phones go dead. But not only did it do that, it also hit our refrigerators. So next morning, my husband and I are like, what's that noise? And upon further investigation, discovered that two beautiful Thermador refrigerators had bit the dust. So this was a big strike. I'm really glad that the angels were looking out for me because I wasn't injured when that lightning strike came through the phone. So I still have the hair on my head. I'm still breathing. All of this is good, Patricia. So.
That's excellent. That's excellent.
Yeah.
In fact, the best part about it is, did it possibly give you opportunity for a new refrige?
It's possible. You know, it took me a week because I live out in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
It took me a week to get an appliance expert here, and he was here today, and I haven't even had a chance to sit down with my husband and hear all of what he found. I can tell you the refrigerators are finally working again. It may be temporary, but still, you know, it's better.
Temporary's good.
Yeah, temporary is good because, you know, for a little while you don't have to feel like you're camping in your own house. So
that's true. That's true.
So tonight we've got so much going on, but we have a fabulous guest coming up, Nick Redfern. Yes. We're going to be talking about his new book, which is Close Encounters of the Fatal Kind: Suspicious Deaths, Mysterious Murders, and Bizarre Disappearances in UFO History. Now, Nick is not just an author and lecturer and journalist. He is a best-selling author, and I can't wait to talk to him about. These are some of the things that he writes about that just keep me up at night. Men in Black and For Nobody's Eyes Only is the name of another book he's written, the NASA Conspiracies. So there's a lot of things. There's a lot of wonderful, exciting topics that we're going to be covering tonight on the UFO subject, one of my favorites.
Great. Yes, it definitely is that.
It is. It is. I think I'm going to start calling Nick Mr. Excitement because he writes about all these things.
I like that.
Incredible.
I like that. It does. It really gets your adrenaline going. I wonder if he stays awake at night when he's doing this writing because, you know, how much is truth, how much is fiction when it starts, and what does it spread out to become? The octopus reaches out and touches so many different aspects that most of us don't even think about.
Well, I know. I cannot wait to hear from him. So he'll be with us in just a few minutes. But first, we got to talk about the 30th, which is today. What does this mean? What's the significance of the 30th?
The 30th it's a very special part when we're looking at the personal day itself, because it's a day that deals with our finances. Isn't it funny that the refrigerator man is at your house today?
Oh, yes, thank God.
It's about the material side of life, and anything to do today that most of us have done has had to do with our finances in one form or another. You'll find out that you've spent more money than planned on today, but it's necessary. And a lot of things have been going on all month that has made major changes. So this is kind of like, if I were out and about, I would probably buy a lotto ticket just for the heck of it, because it deals with money and it deals with the month that deals with gambling and or the possibility of something good happening.
I bought my lottery ticket today, so I'll let you know what happens.
Well, great. See, right on target, young lady.
I guess I am. I'm right on schedule with the number
Perfect.
30.
Well, and you know what's going to be important also is the fact that basically we won't speak again in the month of July. So the next time we speak, we're going to be in a universal 6th year, which is going to be all about different issues, more about family, perfection, and things of that nature. Where this month it's been about quick fixes, major turnovers, and a gamble on things.
So lots of things are going to be different in August, and we're going to hear about that next show. So that's right. That's good. We will be on the alert for all of this. And I also wanted to mention to everybody, this show is live tweeted. So don't forget to check Twitter and participate with us. And you can just use the hashtag Supernatural Girlz, which is GLZ, because you couldn't get all the letters in. So it's GLZ, at Supernatural GLZ, and it's hashtag SG Live. So those are our handles here. Now,
that's good.
We have another handsome star that we're talking about tonight.
Oh, yes, we do, don't we?
For all these young women out there
who are drooling.
The very handsome Steve R. McQueen, who plays Jeremy on The Vampire Diaries. And now his character is a character with a heart. So what's he really like?
Well, the interesting part is he truly is the character he's playing. He's definitely a person with a heart. Not a doubt about that. You know, when he was born, his middle name was actually Chadwick, but he changed it as he grew older to the maiden name of his mother, and Neely Adams in the Family Issue. But you know what's really interesting about this? His mother, because of his mother's connections, he's second cousin to Julio Iglesias.
God, he's got celebrities all over his family tree.
That's right. Handsome and handsome and handsome.
Wow.
Not too shabby.
Not at all. And now on the show, again, he plays the brother to Elena and the younger brother. And, again, he comes across in the role as a very caring, heart-centered person. And you're saying that's kind of who he is, which is exciting.
Is very definitely who he is.
Now, what's coming up for him?
Oh, I always have to laugh. He's in a 9-year. Have you noticed how many of the actors that are really getting a lot of accolades and people are paying attention to them right now are in their 9-year or going into their 9-year?
Yes.
9 deals with the actor, the theater, and things of that nature, and lo and behold, there he is. He's in his 9-year. So there's going to be some type of a mark that's going to be made this year that's going to be pick him out of the litter, shall we say, over the next 12 to 13 months. We'll see a major opportunity for him taking place.
That's terrific. He's another very talented actor on the CW network, which, again, as I've mentioned before, doesn't get a lot of notice generally, but really should, because these young actors that are up and coming, they're just doing a terrific job. They're very believable in their roles, and he certainly puts his heart and soul into it, you can tell.
Well, and they're clean cut. They give you that feeling of nice guys.
He does,
what
definitely.
Role they play.
Yes.
Exactly. And did you know that he played in Without a Trace as well as CSI Miami?
No, really?
Yeah, he played in. I was really surprised. I didn't realize it. But you got to start someplace.
That's right. That's right.
He played in Disney's The Minuteman as Dirk Bogarde. back in 2008.
Quite a few roles before Vampire Diaries, but he's certainly well cast in that role, and it's certainly done a lot for his career.
Most definitely.
Is he intuitive also? Because we talked about some of the other stars, not so much in Vampire Diaries, but in Supernatural. And all the stars you looked at there were highly, highly intuitive. Not so much here, but what about Steve R. McQueen? Does he fall in that category of highly intuitive or not?
No, but what I find with him that's very interesting, he knows who he is, but he doesn't have a big ego. He gives and takes equally well, but his creative side is way up there. Anything to do with his creative side or his work, he's very detailed and he respects what goes on. And he's very, very flexible. He deals with change very well. He's got a good head on his shoulder, no question about that. But the thing that's interesting is his creative side is what it's all about. That's where everything spins. His creative side and his opportunity to deal with changes and accept changes as great opportunities. And that's why we're going to see him go even further than anticipated at this moment in time.
Well, everybody, you heard it here first. This is a star in the making, and Patricia said so. So we're going to keep an eye on this very interesting young man and see where his career takes him. So tonight, oh, my God, I can't wait. This is too exciting. Nick Redfern, oh, my goodness. He has generously agreed to come on our show. He is an author, a lecturer, a journalist who writes about a wide range of unsolved mysteries. His previous books include For Nobody's Eyes Only, the NASA Conspiracies, The Real Men in Black, The Pyramids and the Pentagon, and the book that we are talking about this evening, Close Encounters of the Fatal Kind, Suspicious Deaths, Mysterious Murders, and Bizarre Disappearances in UFO History. Now, all of his books are available on Amazon.com, and the one that I just finished reading, I know you did too, Patricia, Close Encounters of the Fatal Kind, fascinating. And it did keep me up at night. So, definitely. Nick, welcome to the show.
Well, I was going to say hello, Patricia and Patricia, but I'll just say hello, Patricias.
That was very efficient of you.
That's cute.
Or I could say Patricia 1 and Patricia 2. So.
There you go.
Then we'll have to argue who's 1 and 2.
That's
exactly.
Right.
Well, I'm not going to get into that argument. You'll have to
see what I mean? I love it the way you did it.
Well, Nick, we've got to start with this question. How in the world did you get into all of this fascinating stuff with UFOs and government conspiracies? How did this happen for you in your life?
Well, when I was about 6 years old, my parents took me on a week's holiday to Scotland, and we spent a day at Loch Ness. And my dad told me the story of the Loch Ness Monster. And even though, it's a long time ago now, I still have a few memories of that trip. And I can still remember my dad telling me the scenario of like a colony of strange creatures living in the loch. And because Loch Ness is sort of a very spooky-looking place, it's like 22 miles long and about a mile wide and surrounded by these huge hills, it does look a weird and sort of ominous place. And at that age, it got me interested and fascinated, but not to the extent where obviously I wasn't running around like some precocious little 6-year-old investigating things, It was sort of like a story that I guess paralleled, stories of monsters in the closet or under the bed. It was just like a spooky story. But then as I got into my teens, I started reading books by people like John Keel and Brad Steiger. And I liked the sort of things they wrote about, but I also liked their sort of writing style, which was very atmospheric and would sort of pull you in. So that sort of continued sort of through my teens. And then when I left school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I actually wasn't the greatest student at school. And so it was sort of a challenge. You suddenly go from hanging out with all your friends at school to the real world, so to speak. But I was looking around for work, and I actually got a job offer on a magazine in the area I was living at the time, a town called Walsall in England. And the magazine was called Zero. And it was essentially a magazine for young people, for teenagers, early 20s. And it covered things like music, entertainment, celebrity stuff, fashion, that kind of thing. And I did a lot of the music-based stuff, which is one of my big passions and interests. And so the job basically that I had was sort of going to concerts and reviewing them and interviewing people in the music industry, singers and guitarists and whatever, and getting paid for it. And it, didn't feel like a real job. And
that sounds like playtime all the time.
Yeah, and I didn't have to wear a suit and tie, which is something I absolutely hate. And so it was like being almost on holiday and getting paid for it. But I mean, the other side of it, of course, was that I had like an 18-month tutoring on every aspect of journalism, how to write articles, how to conduct interviews, how to structure an article, and to bring the reader in and make it kind of intriguing from the first paragraph. The little tricks of the trade, so to speak. And then in the years that followed, I started doing freelance things for various outlets. And then when I was about 27, something like that, I just took the plunge and I actually quit the job that I'd got and thought, well, I'm either going to make it in this field full time or I'm not. But one way or another, I'm going to find out which one it's going to be.
That's great.
And so that's what I did.
Very brave of you.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
I'm one of these who, I like to sort of chop and change. I mean, although I've lived in the US for 13 years, originally from England, but I got a job offer and I just thought, well, I'll go for it. What's the harm in moving across the other side of the world? I mean, it's still the English language. So.
Very true.
Yes, that is. Well,
so I like to sort of, jump on planes and travel and investigate things and have a good time, a social life as well. I like to sort of split it between the two. I have a working life and the writing, the research, and then I like to switch off and have a regular life of just doing the normal stuff as well. So.
Well, it sounds like you've got quite a balance, and you've certainly found your audience because you are a best-selling author. In fact, Universal Studios bought the rights to one of your books. So congratulations on your success.
Well, thanks. I mean, it's one of these things where, books often get optioned by companies, and unfortunately, it's one of these situations where a lot get optioned, but not many get made. But it could happen one day. I'm always one of these who remains positive on things. I actually do believe if you have a positive attitude or a negative attitude, what happens in your life is kind of reflected by what goes on in your mind. I really do think what you put out there, consciously or not, has an effect on what opportunities you have in life or that you don't have,
No, we certainly agree, don't we, Patricia? That law of attraction, you just can't get around it.
Most definitely.
But this has been a very informative book and also a very scary book because this is not about the Steven Spielberg E.T. This is not about a friendly E.T. experience. And this is kind of about the ETs we want to send home for other reasons. So there's that. But then, as Patricia mentioned, there's so many other elements with the whole UFO field that you've touched on and, in fact, gone into some depth in this book. You've got the shadow government involved. You've got our government involved. You've got our presidents involved. And so there's a lot people could take away from this and say, this whole subject scares the crap out of me. Why would anybody want to have an experience with UFOs and extraterrestrials? Yet I do know people that have had very positive experiences with extraterrestrials. Yeah, so, please bring us into your world in this book. Tell us what you want our audience to know about this whole experience. And why don't you start with the ETs who may not be so friendly?
Well, yeah, I would sort of preface that a little bit by just saying that I absolutely agree with you that the phenomenon has its good side and its not so good side. And I think it's kind of like people. We all try and do the right thing, but we are all capable of doing terrible things. But most of us know that it's sort of wrong to commit murder or rob a bank, so we don't do it, And I think it's the same with the entities that could be coming here, whether it's from outer space or interdimensional, that, to say somebody or a race of people are good or bad. You know, it's very difficult to be that black and white about it. And so that's why I think we have some positive UFO experiences and we have ones that are negative, because that's how, unfortunately, intelligent creatures are on our world. So why shouldn't somebody else's be the same? You know, hopefully most people get a positive encounter. But the reason I decided to write the book was because whenever I'm writing a book, you know, the thing I think about first are the readers. You know, if they're going to buy a book and they're going to spend sort of $15 or $16 on a book, you want to be able to give them something new. You don't want to just go over old ground and copy-paste stuff from here and there.
Recycle the old stories, yes, exactly.
Yeah, so, and that's always important to me, is that you keep in mind your audience. And so what I always do when I'm writing a book, I always try and come up with something that hasn't been done before. You know, even if I'm writing about a well-known subject like Bigfoot or the Chupacabra or Roswell, it doesn't matter what I'm writing about, as long as I can put a new spin on it or new information. But one of the things that has always interested me are these stories of mysterious deaths in the UFO field. But what really surprised me as I was sort of figuring out what book to do next was that nobody has actually previously ever done a full-length book on all the weird deaths that have gone on since the 40s to the present day. And I was sort of amazed and also a little bit puzzled that nobody had done that. And so what I did, I spent about 2 months just reviewing and researching the entire history of that subject. And then I spent about another 6 months researching it fully, and then it was just a case of spending like another 6 months just, you know, 8 to 5, Monday to Friday, writing the thing. And that was sort of the background to it, really.
Well, you've done a great job. It's an excellent book. And again, the name of the book is Close Encounters of the Fatal Kind by Nick Redfern. It's available on Amazon.com. We highly recommend this book. It is really troubling to see how many disappearances and unusual deaths there have been. Really troubling. And you probably don't even have all of them in here. There may be a whole bunch of them we don't even know about yet.
Well, yeah, that's one of the problems, is that, I mean, there are certain cases we can identify and talk about and pretty much conclude that there was something very, very sinister about it. Then there are other ones where, you know, people have said, well, maybe it was just a car accident or maybe they just died young and so on. Then, of course, there are cases where people have vanished, never to be seen again, where we don't know if they're dead or just somewhere else. Mm-hmm. But, yeah, I mean, one of the things I think why people haven't really appreciated the long-term scale of this phenomenon, this aspect, I should say, of the phenomenon, is because people haven't really sort of put all the threads together. You know, somebody may know about this death, somebody else knows about that one, but it's only when you put the entire sort of spectrum of them together from 47 to now that you start to see a trend. And you also see a trend in the way the deaths have occurred. I mean, as I said, there are disappearances at the hands of what seem to be UFOs, but then there are suspicious deaths which might be due to somebody who's hiding the UFO truth that once was kept quiet, and where you have specific ways people die, like car accidents or alleged suicides in the car where they, you know, put a hose pipe through the window, etc., or they fall from a high building. These are sort of common denominators that go through a lot of the stories. When you see how many they are, you do begin to think, wow, you know, somebody's just taking all this from a pamphlet or a booklet, you know, top 10 ways to wipe people out, you know. It's like, throw them out of buildings, number one. I mean, I'm not sort of making light of it, but it literally kind of makes it sound like number one is throw them out of a building, number two is stage it to look like they've killed themselves in the car, number three is, you know, give them some pill that mimics the, you know, a heart attack or whatever, that kind of thing.
Well, and now you're talking about the human against human situation. So
yes.
And you bring up, I think, the most troubling aspect of this. For some reason, and I don't know about you, Patricia, I wanted you to check in on this too, but for some reason it doesn't bother me quite as much in terms of the UFO to human or the extraterrestrial to human situation. Things can happen there, like you mentioned. There's good, there's bad. And we've heard this before on the show from many Native American elders who talk about the fairy realm and other entities, that there are good and bad in all. But when it comes to human against human, and when we have solid citizens who have had UFO experiences and they're being harassed or they're being threatened or they're being killed, I find that much more upsetting.
Yeah, that's more scary than the actual situation.
Well, yeah, what I think's going on, people ask me, people said to me, why is the government or the Air Force, killing people or whatever? And my honest opinion is I really don't think they are. What I believe is that probably at least several decades ago, maybe even more, that prior to that, we know that military agencies and intelligence agencies and so on were heavily researching the UFO subject and, may well have had bodies and wreckage in storage somewhere. But I think what happened at some point, as I said, several decades ago, is that all of this material evidence, the data, the documents, the bodies, the wreckage, was sort of farmed out, if you like, to what we might call like a shadow agency or a shadow government, where literally perhaps 99.9% of everybody in government knows nothing about it. In other words, it's sort of an unusual concept for people to think about, but if you imagine sort of a combination of something like the old stories of the Illuminati, like a powerful worldwide secret order that has massive funding, that is sort of run by very powerful people, but nobody really knows who they are. And then you combine that with sort of these highly advanced private corporations that do research into things like exotic biology and weapon systems and fringe technologies, and they come together. And I think that's what we're dealing with, is that it's sort of like a shadow agency that even the government knows nothing about. And I truly believe that, while we're doing this show and it's going out, there could be people sitting in the Pentagon saying to each other, yeah, it is true, we don't know what happened at Roswell, and everybody thinks we do. And I think that's why we don't have so many of the answers that we could have, because everybody's sort of pointing their finger at the Air Force or the CIA or the Pentagon, saying you're the bad guys, you're hiding it. But I truly don't think they are. I think there are people in government who suspect this shadow agency exists, and even they're not able to penetrate it. So that's what I think is going on. And when it comes to these murders, again, I don't think anybody in government is involved in this. What I think is that an agency like this hypothetical shadow agency hires the sorts of people who will just get the job done. Nobody knows their names. Nothing's committed to paper. There's people that can be called upon, probably got 5 or 6 different aliases and passports, etc. And they just perform that task. They get their money and they go back into the shadows again. And so, in other words, it's not like Agent Smith from this agency or Agent Jones from that agency. It really is all done outside, I think, of government.
That's a fascinating explanation, and I tend to agree with you on this. I think the government knows something more than
they know
what we expect.
Yeah,
but in terms of the actual enactment and the funding behind all of that, I agree with what you're saying. I think that is probably what's happening. And someone else mentioned this to me about, you can do all these freedom of information requests and all this kind of stuff to try to get to the bottom of some of these abductions and sightings and things like that. But as you mentioned, when you're dealing with a shadow government involved with a big money corporate entities, then there is no paper trail. Nobody's keeping records. And even if they were, we wouldn't have access to them.
No,
well,
of course
they always said everything's the offshore items. It's always someplace else. No one can get to it.
Yeah, and I think this is, a lot of people, even within ufology, find it hard to understand the concept of the possibility that the things that we think the government knows all about, actually they may have done 50 years ago, but since then it really has gone sort of private and underground and shadowy, so to speak.
Wow.
And now, as you said, I do think there are people in government who know something. But when you find, for example, that we know that Bill Clinton asked his Attorney General to look into the UFO subject because he couldn't find anything. We heard stories of other presidents being blocked, and it obviously doesn't get much higher than the office of the president. But if the president's getting blocked, this leads me to think it's clearly not the government that's doing it. It's clearly some agency, or like I said, like a shadow agency that's so powerful it actually sort of supersedes world governments around the world. It's sort of above all of them.
Yeah,
we certainly have people out there that have gone rogue over the years, and to be able to follow the breadcrumbs to find out the who, the what, and the where is almost an impossibility. With all the information that's made available to us, we still don't have answers.
No, I mean, we're getting there. We've got some answers. I think the problem is how we get them. I mean, for example, a classic example is Jesse Marcel, the late Jesse Marcel Jr., whose father was Major Jesse Marcel, who was one of the first people on the scene at the Roswell crash in '47 and helped recover all this strange wreckage. Well, Jesse Marcel Jr., who unfortunately died not too long ago as well, he went on record when he wrote his book about his father's experiences that he was actually contacted by somebody who's either in Congress or the Senate who wanted to speak to him about how this man had uncovered evidence of sort of massive like channeling of funds out of government into what was like some sort of shadow agency, and it was buried so deep that even Congress and the Senate could not find it at all, literally. And so they approached Jesse Marcel and flew him out to have a sort of behind closed doors meeting in which, he was openly asked, do you have any idea who these people are and how we find them? And this was the government asking him. That's the bizarreness of this subject and of the concept of the shadow government. The government was actually asking Marcel, do you know who's running the UFO program? So,
my God, that's very telling. Very telling.
Yeah.
And very frightening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is because of the implications of the fact that the people we think are running the show may actually really think they are, but there's so much manipulation going on that they're actually not.
Yeah, behind the scenes. And, when you talk about also there's so many different, and I've heard this before, and I know we all have, about many different races of extraterrestrials. And have you been able to identify or have anybody identify for you any of the races that are particularly dangerous to the human race?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, a lot of people I've spoken to who've had UFO experiences, like close encounter ones with entities, most of them have had a negative experience with the so-called reptilian types. Mm-hmm. I really don't know many who've had a positive one, and it's more been from the perspective of not what's happened to them, but they get like a really bad, unsettling vibe from them. They kind of give off this sense of menace, and I don't think it's just because they're like 8-foot-tall reptiles and we're naturally, wary of them for that. In the same way you'd be wary of like a crocodile, it's like a subconscious feeling, like people who are frightened of spiders or whatever. I really don't think it's just that. I think it's partly that there's something about them that people just don't like. So that's been, I guess, sort of the most negative thing I've heard. But, a lot of abduction cases, although the abductees are told it's for their own good, I haven't seen people who've had a negative experience from the perspective of feeling threatened, but a lot of them did feel like a negative experience from being traumatized by it. In other words, it may not have been a deliberate attempt to frighten them, but it was just a sort of a psychological shock of literally being abducted that affected them. So I think, in other words, we might have some cases where it's perceived as a traumatic, violent and frightening event, but it may be no different to, a rat feeling traumatized and frightened when it's placed in a little maze in a lab or whatever, all these huge people in white coats watch it run around and that kind of thing. I think it could be more like that.
I know that feeling.
Well, that's a good point, Nick, because there is certainly a collision of realities that occurs when people have an abduction experience. And I'll tell you, we had, thanks to Becky Andreasen, who was a co-host with us for quite some time last year and into this year, we were able, because of her efforts, to have Travis Walton on the show.
Oh, cool.
And Travis was certainly very traumatized by the experience, but interestingly enough, he did share with us on the show that he really thought that the extraterrestrials didn't mean him any harm, and it was accidental that he got basically caught up in the energy system of the ship as it was taking off. They didn't mean to take him with them, but if they hadn't, he probably would have died from the exposure to that energy that the ship was generating. So he had both experiences, one that they really didn't mean to hurt him, and they did take him up to kind of fix him from this energy blast, but at the same time, he was just out of his mind with fear while he was on the ship. And Go ahead.
Sorry, go on.
No, I'm done. I'm done.
I was just going to say I met Travis late last year, and I was sort of very impressed by him. I'd never met him before, but it was at a conference in Philadelphia, and I read his book, and I thought the book was good. But to sort of meet him in person, you sit opposite someone, you get to know him. I was sort of very impressed by everything he had to say.
Yeah, we were as well, and we were very, very grateful that he came on the show. But it was an interesting mix of emotion for him, without a doubt, which I think that's true for a number of abductees. And I love the fact that they come forward, and it's so unfortunate that people like Travis and also Betty Andreasen and her husband Bob Luca, that they face so much criticism from skeptics and so much harassment from whoever's doing this harassment, whether it's government or shadow government. But it's unfortunate because these are really good people that are stepping forward and sharing their experience, and we should welcome that rather than be so critical of it. I know everybody listening to the show is more of that mind of welcoming this, but it's just a terrible situation to be in when you're trying to tell the truth and you're getting hit from all sides.
Yeah.
You can't help but wonder also how far back do some of these things go, because we're talking about the 40s and such when we really started talking about it.
Well, I've started the book with the 40s because primarily that's when, the UFO phenomenon in the modern era at least really took off big time. And so we've got, people started collecting reports and that's when everything began. But I'm sure that if there were enough records available and, people had time, we would find, centuries-old reports where somebody saw a strange light in the sky or something and then, they died the next day. It's just a matter of somebody having the time to go through, like, all the old newspapers from 150 years ago. But I would be surprised if we didn't find something. So.
Well, that's what I was thinking about, was the fact that this didn't just happen. It's just that we just started, with so much going on with communication these days between the phones and the TV and the radio and such as this, that wasn't as privy for people prior to that. And you wonder, sometimes when they're going through some of these old attics and they find different pieces, I wonder if they're really gathering them up for the rest of us to see, because we all know that there's got to be much more than what we've already seen.
Yep. No, you're right. You're absolutely right.
Now, in your book, you talk about a number of people that were killed in regard to a sighting and an event in Mexico. Could you tell our audience that I found that fascinating? This is a very interesting story with a possible collision between a small aircraft and a disc. Can you tell us about that?
This story goes back to 1974. The story itself didn't actually surface till the 1990s, and it was provided by sort of retired insider personnel to a woman named Helene Douglas. And Helene was at the forefront of a group in the 1990s called Operation Right to Know, which was kind of like the whole disclosure movement today. It was sort of using like a political proactive approach to try and get information released. And that's probably why Helene, I think, was contacted. and given this story and various papers and documents. And the story itself was that in August 1974, some sort of object was being tracked in the Gulf of Mexico by both Mexican military forces and U.S. forces. And the reason they were tracking it carefully was because it was performing all sorts of strange maneuvers and clearly wasn't a regular aircraft, and both sides obviously wanted to know what it was. Well, the object was tracked closing in on Mexican airspace, specifically in the region of Chihuahua. And suddenly another blip appeared on the screens, and the two seemed to merge into one after a very short time. Now, there were several possibilities that one object had kidnapped the other, or vice versa, that they'd both gone below radar scanning levels, or they possibly even collided and crashed to the ground. Now, bear in mind this was in Mexican territory. The story from the American side came from monitoring the Mexican communications. And as they were listening, they heard that somebody had reported something coming down in the desert area of Chihuahua, and that a military unit was going to be dispatched to see what it was. Now, this, of course, was a process across a number of hours. Obviously wasn't all going to take place in minutes. But what happened was that eventually a Mexican military team got out there and reportedly found what was clearly the wreckage, but just totally pulverized wreckage of a very small airplane, something probably the size of like a Cessna, like a two-man plane. And in a sort of worst-case scenario possible, it actually collided with a small UFO. When I say small, it was actually supposedly only about 12 feet in diameter. So the inference is that it was probably some sort of remotely controlled device, unless the crew were really small, But this object was fully intact, apart from having quite like a violent dent on one side of it. Now, apparently, a U.S. spy satellite was vectored over the area and took high-resolution photographs. And the photographs apparently showed like a large military truck and trailer in the area, a couple of jeeps, and a smaller truck. And the object was in the process of being loaded onto the back of the trailer. Well, the satellite continued to watch all this, and the radio transmissions were intercepted, and they were traveling for something like 15 or 20 miles when suddenly there was total radio silence, and it seemed like the trucks and all the vehicles had stopped as well. And so this sort of puzzled, probably puzzled both sides. And so a plan was hastily launched to have a jet fighter take off from Texas and just head down there as soon as possible, just floor it and get there, And
right away.
They reportedly reached the area and made a low flyover and reported that they could see the convoy just sitting there, but they could also see a number of what were clearly dead Mexican military personnel just lying strewn around the area.
Nice.
And so then the decision was taken, well, what do we do? And the idea was they didn't want it to fall into the hand of the Mexicans. So again, just over from the border in Texas, a quick reaction helicopter unit was sent out to retrieve at least whatever could be retrieved. Now, the story is that because this object was literally only like 12 feet in diameter, one of the helicopters was easily able to pick it up. It was just sort of hooked onto, pulleys and ropes, etc., and hauled into the sky and taken to the nearest base. And this was before the Mexican personnel could get on the scene. And reportedly, high explosives were used to just decimate the entire area, so there wouldn't be anything left other than possibly the already broken up remains of this small aeroplane. Now, the story was that when they got out there, the U.S. military guys, they were dressed in complete hazmat-type outfits, from head to foot.
Sure.
Because the theory was that the Mexican personnel had been exposed to some sort of fast-acting alien virus that had killed them. Now, what's interesting is that going right back to the early days of NASA was very concerned that our astronauts would go into space and inadvertently bring back with them alien microbes against which we would have no natural immunity, and it could cause like a super plague across the planet. And NASA, the Soviet Union, the UK, France, China, they've all got rules and regulations, emergency rules in place to deal with like the theoretical outbreak of an alien virus. You know, should it one day.
So we all have protocol for this.
Oh yeah, they've all of them have got a. I mean, it's not secret protocols as such. It's you know, you can actually read the documents, but they do say, in essence, you know, in the event that something breaks out, they can act. Some of the legislation is actually quite vague, where you can read into it that they could just install martial law overnight if the virus started spreading, you know, and tens of thousands becomes hundreds of thousands, becomes millions, becomes billions or whatever. So this may well have been what happened. Now, what's interesting is that Elaine Douglas was told that when this disc reached the United States, because it was only 12 foot in diameter, it was loaded sort of vertically on its side into a large truck with a high roof, and it was driven to Atlanta, Georgia. Now, what's interesting is that Atlanta is the headquarters of the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC. And it's the CDC who coordinate, you know, potential emergency situations where there would be sort of big viral outbreaks. So, in other words, if there was some sort of viral component to the crash and the deaths, then the CDC in Atlanta, Georgia, would have been the ideal place to take all the evidence and try and have somebody figure out, you know, was it an alien virus or was it a chemical element or something like that? We don't really know, but I do find it fascinating that the Mexican people all suddenly died, and then the craft is taken to the very city where the Centers for Disease Control is based.
There's no coincidence there, that's for sure. No. And I'm sure everybody listening from Atlanta must feel really happy to know that this dangerous disc was brought right to Atlanta. So,
well, the other good side of thing is that it's kind of like, I don't know if you saw the episode of The Walking Dead where they actually go to the CDC. I mean, that's one of the funny things. That actual CDC plays a big role in The Walking Dead, where they hide out in there and you actually get to see, you know, some genuine kind of things that the CDC does.
And that they were even helpless in the face of this virus that everybody is afflicted with in The Walking Dead. Great show. We're going to be talking about the stars in that one, too. But, yeah,
well, the thing is the problem with alien viruses or hypothetical alien viruses, you know, is that we have natural immunity to a lot of diseases and we can cope with them. But there are some viruses, you know, even terrestrial viruses that we simply cannot fight off without, you know, extreme cocktails of drugs and that. Like HIV, you know, when that first surfaced, people were dropping like flies. Today, they can live, you know, much longer, almost normal length lives with, you know, providing they have the right drugs. Yeah, that's how far it's come.
They've made a lot of progress, yes. And now here we are with Ebola moving across Africa, which is another threat. But absolutely, these are interesting concerns. And I know when I talked to Mad Barry Anderson, the great Tuscarora medicine man who has since passed away, he talked about moon rocks, and that he was contacted by government officials because they had brought back these moon rocks, and they were growing. They were growing, and they were busting out of the glass containers they were in, and they did not know what to do. Wow. So they called medicine men in to the situation to help them because they were really out of their league. So it was an interesting story from Mad Bear about this particular event. And again, it's this collision of worlds. We're bringing in things that don't belong here. And this is from the moon, and here it is on this planet, and it's going to react differently. And if there was a virus, an alien virus that was exposed to these people and knocked them out that quickly, I mean, that's immediate death that you're describing there in Mexico. That is a really, really curious and frightening thing.
Well, what's worrying is that most terrestrial viruses, you know, they don't sort of react like the zombie virus where you're bitten, you know, and you suddenly start changing in 30-second, you're this violent killer or whatever. Most viruses on the Earth, even things like rabies, which is the closest thing to like the zombie virus. If you see somebody with full-blown rabies, that's how they are. They're just violent and crazed. But even that, that can have, that can take weeks to develop after the initial symptoms or the initial bite. But we just don't know with a hypothetical alien virus. Maybe it could operate that quickly. And if it did, and we have no automatic defense from it, which we wouldn't, because by default it would be, by definition, it would be alien to us. So there is a good chance we would not be able to fight that off at all.
No, we wouldn't be. Well, Nick, I am going to call you Mr. Excitement. This is just a very, very fascinating discussion. I'm going to have to take a short commercial break. Please, everybody, stay tuned. This is just great stuff. And if you have a question for Nick, give us a call at 646-478-0828. Again, the number is 646-478-0828. We've got a number of questions that are lined up for you in the chat room, and I know Patricia and I have tons of questions for you about the Men in Black, and we're just going to have to keep you here all night, I think. So,
at least.
That's all right, I don't mind.
Good. Well, hang on and stay tuned, everybody. We will be right back.
This is Nick Redfern, founder of the Organic Wine Company. As one of the pioneers of the organic wine movement, since 1980 I have brought you the very best and most authentic organic wines directly to your table. I work with small family estates who grow certified organic grapes and produce exceptional wines. You can purchase our wines individually from our website at theorganicwinecompany.com or join one of our wine clubs. Our organic wines are perfect for you and for your family as gifts for friends and relatives, and they are simply spectacular for the holidays. Visit us at theorganicwinecompany.com to enjoy the very best organic wines conveniently delivered to your door. I am Nick Redfern, passionate about my mission. I offer to you vegan, organic, and biodynamic wines made by people of the heart, wines with a heart. Au revoir. Call us at 1-888-ECO-WINE.
Your property tax bill. Have you seen it lately? It's frightening. Your property taxes are going up while your home value is going down. It's time to fight back and win. For the real truth about the property tax system, get attorney Pat Quintilian's book, Are You Getting Screwed on Your Property Taxes? How to Find Out and How to Fix It. Attorney Quintilian answers all your questions and gives you the facts you need to fight a property tax bill that is spiraling out of control. You'll also read about what happens to property owners who don't check their property records, only to find out too late they're taxed on square footage, fixtures, and even buildings that they don't own. Is this happening to you? Learn your rights. Buy attorney Pat Quintilian's book today. Are You Getting Screwed on Your Property Taxes? How to Find Out and How to Fix It. Available on Amazon.com.
Are you ready for a new experience of freedom and powerful connection? Would you like a positive, effortless change in your life? Then come to CosmicFusion.com, where we offer the most advanced energy clearing and expansion techniques in the world, with a quantum vortex energy to activate your divine blueprint and life's purpose. When your soul leads the way with cosmic fusion and quantum vortex energy, you can break clear of past difficulties and blocks with the power of the source. With cosmic fusion, the source energy does the work for you. It's easy and effortless. Listen to our free meditation right from our Cosmic Fusion website, the Cosmic Code Meditation. Sign up for one of our interactive webinars today. Come to Cosmic Fusion, www.KOSMICfusion.com, to experience an effortless awakening and transformation. Are you ready for an upgrade? Are you ready for a new experience of living in the fifth dimensional magic and powerful connection? Then visit CosmicFusion.com today. CosmicFusion.com.
Welcome back, everyone. We are having a fascinating discussion tonight with best-selling author Nick Redfern. We're talking about his book, Close Encounters of the Fatal Kind, Suspicious Deaths, Mysterious Murders, and Bizarre Disappearances in UFO History. So I have to ask you, Nick, you are kind of blowing the whistle on a lot of this stuff. Have you ever been threatened?
No, I haven't, and people have asked me this quite a bit since the book's come out, and I think the reason I haven't is because one of the trends I found in the book where people have clearly died under mysterious circumstances is where I think somebody in one of these shadow-type groups thinks or knows that this person has something major that it really is going to topple the whole secrecy angle. You know, they've got something that will blow it wide open, whether it's like a scientist who's got access to classified files or who somebody's inadvertently stumbled upon something that could open all the doors. Then they're the sorts of people who, you know, are in danger and, you know, they may have paid the ultimate price. But I think most of us in ufology who are doing research, you know, we collect a lot of stories, a lot of information, but we don't have that smoking gun. Mm-hmm. And I think it's the people who do have the smoking gun or somebody thinks they've got it, they're the ones who are in danger. You know, in other words, nobody's ever provided me with, you know, an alien autopsy report, you know, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But I think somebody who might have been in that position or somebody thought somebody was in that position, they're the ones who need to watch out. I think if you sort of do what I do, like historical research and use the Freedom of Information Act, yes, you can come up with a lot of good information, very strong material that does really prove and demonstrate the reality of the phenomenon. But at the end of the day, it's not a body, it's not a piece of wreckage, that kind of thing. And I think when it is, and someone's got it, that's the time for them to be careful about what they're doing.
I know everybody's holding their breath in this field, waiting to see if WikiLeaks is going to send out something that will be that smoking gun for the UFO phenomenon.
Well,
have you heard any rumors about that?
Well, I mean, you look at all these things like that and stuff like Edward Snowden, and nothing really has come through about UFOs. And again, I think that's why I think it's all done where I don't think the government is the guilty party, because I think with people like this, at least we would see something. Now, the skeptics would say, well, we're not seeing anything because there's nothing there, but I don't believe that. But I really do believe, you know, that the NSA or whoever isn't hiding dead alien bodies under the main headquarters or whatever. But and that's why I think I take it back to that shadow government, because all these people like Snowden, there's never a UFO angle to it. So that I really don't think, you know, they're hiding it. That's a good pointer that they're not, I think.
That's a great answer to that. Yes, that makes perfect sense. It really does. You know, years ago, I was introduced at a conference, a UFO conference, to someone from Canada who had his own television show long before all of these paranormal shows were popular. And he was contacted by a pilot, an Air Canada pilot, and he said, I have footage that I took from the cockpit window of a ship where you can clearly see extraterrestrials inside. You can clearly see them. So he arranged to have a meeting with this person, and he didn't trust him completely. He had him, like, you know, go to a parking lot. It was just like out of the X-Files. You know, go to the parking lot, leave the tape in a trash bin, I'll come and pick it up. And he was actually watching the guy with the tape, with binoculars from another vantage point, and the guy put the tape in the trash bin as he was told, and the television host went and got it, and he was amazed at what he saw, and he was ready to air it on his show. However, the next day, there were vans in front of his house, and the doorbell rang, and these men said to him, if you air that tape, you will never see your son again. We know he goes to such and such school. I think his son was like 8 years old or something. And he said, we will pick him up and you will never see him if you air that tape. So, of course, he never did. I don't know what he did with it since, but the tape has never been aired to my knowledge. But that's a good example of what you're talking about. There's the smoking gun.
Yeah. I mean,
but
when you said about
kind of power?
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
that's
an important question as well, like the logistics of it all. But, I mean, you made a good point when you make that, like, X-Files analogy because, I've never been in that. Some people actually think I'm in this position all the time, but I never actually have been in a position where somebody says, come to the local parking lot at, or at 3 a.m. and goes to the lowest level, and you'll see, a guy stood next to a Mercedes with a manila envelope. That has never, ever, happened to me. But people think that's people do think that's sometimes how I live, but I really don't. But I mean, when that does happen, I mean, that's a classic example of what you've just spoken about. That does show that when you have something or somebody thinks you've got it, that's when somebody pops up and makes the threat. But when you're just dealing with things like freedom of information documents and witness testimony, even I have to admit it's unfortunate from our perspective as well, but it can still be denied because you don't have the proof. But when you have the proof, that's when I think people like this guy, when his son was threatened, that's a classic example of how and why it happens, because somebody is really fearful the person has something.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Now, I have a friend who's high up in the security chain, and he sent me an article today to read for the show, and it was about Mr. Schneider, Phil Schneider. I don't know much about him other than what I've just read in this document here. Are you familiar with his work as a former government geologist and engineer? And I believe he met an untimely death, and he had a lot to say about UFOs and extraterrestrials.
Yeah, he was found dead in the 1990s. I think it was 99 or 96, and it was passed off as a suicide, but there's certain things that suggested it wasn't. But what was interesting about Phil Schneider's stuff, he spent a lot of time lecturing on the subject of underground bases and focused a lot on the alleged alien underground base at Dulce, New Mexico. And the Dulce story is a very strange one about supposedly some sort of alien installation buried inside and beneath a large mesa in Dulce called the Archuleta Mesa. This story goes back to the late 70s, and it's filled with stories of how supposedly there's this huge alien presence under the mountain, but even the government won't sort of move in and do anything about it. That supposedly it's like a no-go area for everybody, and that just nobody will even dare risk entering some of these caverns and caves to figure out what's going on.
Wow.
Yeah, if you sort of do a search engine on Dulce Underground Base, it's DULCE. I mean, there's massive amounts of material, and Phil Schneider spoke a lot about that and his knowledge of it as well.
Yeah, I mean, he seemed to be able to break it down. He talked about 9 races of aliens that regard humans as some type of a food source. And it reminds me of the old Twilight Zone, To Serve Man, which turned out to be a cookbook. So one of the great classic Twilight Zones. Yeah, somebody was onto something way back then. But all of these. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead, sweet. I'll finish after you do.
Now, all of these stories coming out, and then the fact that these people do meet untimely deaths, and it's made to look like a natural death or a suicide or something. It just all does seem to fit as another piece in this big puzzle, which you have cataloged in your book.
Oh, yeah, and I mean, there's that many puzzles. You know, it's kind of like if you've got one piece of a jigsaw on the floor, or if you've got all the pieces on the floor, you don't see the full picture until you put it together, and that's what I try to do is, you know, that when you've got random snippets here and there, you don't appreciate how long this has gone on for, and incredibly how often it's gone on as well, but it's sort of just been dismissed. And but as I said, it is really only when you put all the pieces together you kind of then realise that, wow, there's barely a year gone by when there hasn't been at least one example of this happening.
Yes,
well,
and
the UFOs in the Phoenix area has happened quite frequently. And the first thing they do, instead of seeing what can be done and how come, is to automatically dispute anything has ever taken place, and it's all puffed away, and it keeps coming back, but it's always in the same areas, and they're seeing the same types of things. So that makes, you have to wonder, that many people can't totally be off their little space.
Yeah, they can't all be delusional. You know, they're all seeing the same thing, and they're taking video of it, and there's, of course, no explanation offered.
They say no, which is always surprising. How do you think that this fits with the what is it, the triangle, with the Bermuda Triangle and things of that nature?
Oh, well, yeah, that's a good point. I mean, most of the cases I talk about in the book, you know, they are quite sinister and mysterious. And when I say mysterious, I don't just mean strange, but I mean mysterious from the suspicious angle. But when you're looking at things like the Bermuda Triangle, I often wonder that may well not be anything that's deliberately hostile. I mean, there are various different theories that perhaps natural energies in the area, or even as some people believe, like ancient technologies that may be sort of buried beneath the sea when, you know, ancient civilizations, that they actually have some sort of effect on, you know, aircraft engines, ships, and they might get swallowed up. Or, you know, there's also the interdimensional theory that certain parts of the world have openings or portals, and that you know, you could go through one and come out the other side in a completely different realm. And things today like quantum physics are allowing for the existence of multi-dimensions beyond ours. You know, it's kind of like being in the car listening to your radio and you don't like the song that's playing, so you flip to another channel and you flip to another. Well, all these channels, dozens of them, are all going on at the same time, but you can only ever be tuned into one at any given moment. And it's sort of like that. But if we understood the technology, maybe we could, you know, flip in and out of dimensions as well. And maybe that's what happens in places like the Bermuda Triangle, because there are certain areas that seem to have far more disappearances than others. There's like an equivalent of the Bermuda Triangle in Japan called the Devil's Sea, where, again, ships have vanished, aircraft have vanished, pilots have gone missing. There are even stories going back like 1,000 years where sailors back then, Japanese sailors then, thought it was a very superstitious and mysterious area, and they sort of created legends that like sea dragons would pull the ships down, you know, and they would never be seen again. But I think that's probably a distorted legend based on the probable mysterious loss of, you know, genuine cases of ships just vanishing. So we do get certain places that are like hotspots, but I'm not, to come back to your point, I'm not sure if we should consider that as sinister rather than just some bizarre technology or science that unfortunately has a bad side effect on us, you know.
Well, you know, at the Smithsonian, there's the one area about South American, and it's I'm trying to remember the area and I can't think right now, but they have all of their masks and things from the Incas that are very small and whatever. Yet the masks that they have shown are of a Caucasian race, and those were the masks that they used, and they had no contact with others other than their own species at that point in time. It goes, I think, I forget the amount of time lapse that there was on that, but it made it almost impossible for them to have ever seen anyone of the Caucasians. And they were talking about they were using these masks as their gods.
I think if we look back into I think if we look back into the ancient past, we clearly really don't know much beyond the last sort of 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years. It sort of really gets hazy after that, and I think our history as we know it really isn't history as it was. I even think there could have been civilizations that flourished long before ours. Who knows, maybe 30, 40, 50,000 years ago, and all these legends about Atlantis and Lemuria and things like that probably are, I think, based on almost like inherited memories and passed down legends and traditions of sort of super races that existed before us. They may not have been worldwide, they may not have had the same technology like cars and computers. We probably would have found more of them, but they may have had sort of far more alternative technologies in a very different way to ours, but surpassing us as well. And they, whatever happened to them, I don't know, but I think these sort of distorted legends that we have of sort of super races in the past, I think probably do have some sort of, a basis in reality.
Yes, I agree. That sounds true to me. Now, I've got to revisit this whole idea with you and the experience that people have had with Men in Black. And you've done a whole book on this, but you've also mentioned it in your new book, Close Encounters of the Fatal Kind. But this is a subject that's always fascinated me, too. What in the world are these Men in Black? Tell us about this. What are they?
Actually, probably the Men in Black are actually probably my favourite subject to write about. I've done 2 books, or actually I've written 3 books on the Men in Black, 2 published, and I've got another one coming out later this year because I get so many cases and stories and theories. But whenever people think of the Men in Black, they think of Tommy Lee Jones and Will Smith from the movies.
Yeah,
and
true.
but that's that shows the power of like popular culture, because in the movies, the Men in Black are essentially portrayed as agents of a secret government agency, and they look normal, they look like FBI agents or NSA guys or whatever. But the reality of the situation is, if you go back to the early 50s when the Men in Black mystery really began, the first book on the subject was written in 56. It was called They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers, written by Gray Barker. But if you go back to the original reports, and I would say a good 95% of all the ones I get, the reports are nothing like regular government people. Typically, in most reports, the Men in Black are described as being sort of 5 foot to 5 feet 5 tall. Their skin's sort of white to the point of looking anemic. They're very emaciated. They wear these sort of strange old suits and like 1950s style hats, and they wear these large wraparound sunglasses, which when people get close to them, they see these large sort of bulging, staring eyes behind them. And very often they only turn up at people's doorsteps late at night. They don't very often turn up in the day. They knock on the door, and it's almost like the person's common sense factors have been like hijacked, taken over, because they actually go to the door and open it. Who would do that at 11 o'clock at night when you hear sort of 3 slow bangs on your front door? Now, when the person opens the door in this sort of almost like a trance-like state they've been rendered into, the Men in Black won't come in until they're invited, and this sort of parallels the ancient stories of vampires, where
it does.
The first time a vampire comes to your house, he has to be invited in. So I sometimes wonder if these old stories and legends of vampires, which are dressed in black and they look pale, could they have been early reports of people meeting the Men in Black? So then the Men in Black sort of single file come in this sort of creepy, sort of almost strange walk-in fashion, and then they sit down, they proceed to sort of threaten the witness who may have had a UFO experience and tell them not to talk about it, and they infer that something could happen to them or their family, and the person just essentially takes what they're told. Again, it's like a certain portion of their mind just isn't functioning the way it should, where you would think to phone the police, or if you've got a gun, at least point the gun at them, if not shoot them. But they don't. It's like they don't think to do this. And a number of people, this is where it gets into sinister areas, which actually takes a lot of the Men in Black reports down a more paranormal path than a UFO path, is that many of the people who've encountered the Men in Black in their homes have said that when the Men in Black are sitting opposite them, very often in groups of 3, one's doing all the talking, but the other 2 are just intently staring at them without saying a word. And the witnesses actually felt that the MIB was sort of draining them of their bodily energy. One of them actually described it as how, like, a diabetic might crash, if they miss 2 meals or whatever the science is, behind diabetes, whether they, they haven't had their injections or they're too much or whatever. But it's kind of like they felt they were starting to crash. They felt weak and dizzy, and literally felt that these creatures were like parasites, just bleeding them dry. And on top of that, I've actually got a lot of Men in Black reports where there's no UFO angle to it at all. For example, I've got some cases where people have been dabbling with Ouija boards, and they'd received visits from identical beings. There's no doubt it was the same type of category.
And what would the Men in Black, or the one that is speaking, have to say about this? That's interesting. This has no UFO angle.
I mean,
what do they say to them? Stop using the Ouija board?
No, in those cases, well, not literally. They don't come out and literally say that, but it's more sort of a warning threat to stop messing with things that don't concern you. And a lot of it is like inferring things and allowing the person to put the pieces together, but it all comes down to like a threat. But I mean, I've got other ones where, again, there was no UFO component, or in some cases where there was, but after the MIB left, in the immediate hours afterwards, and possibly for a couple of days, they experienced very violent poltergeist activity in the home. So, again, you have a lot of these stories that clearly, they're linked to UFOs, but they have far more of a supernatural aspect to them rather than anything to do with government people or even anything to do with a shadow agency. But where it gets confusing, I think I know there are a number of examples when agencies have, if you like, mimicked the real Men in Black to when they want to silence someone. So, in other words, they do this, I think, so that if the person does speak out and starts talking about Men in Black in old fedora hats and suits, people laugh at them. So, in other words, I think agencies have employed the image of the weirder Men in Black to cover their tracks. So, in other words, this is where it gets confusing, because you've got these real creepy little Men in Black, then you've got agencies mimicking them to cover the things they want to do, and then we have other theories that there could be like other categories of Men in Black, like time travelers. Maybe the reasons they wear old-fashioned clothes is because they get the timeline wrong when they come back. Things like that. So there's lots of different angles and ideas for the MIB.
Now, in the chat room, there's a lot of conversation going on here about this. Again, this is such an exciting subject, and so much unknown about it. But I'm so glad you're doing another book, Nick. You're going to have to come back and when that book comes out and share all this with us again, please.
This will be the third one. I'm actually just started the writing process of a book on Women in Black stories, and
wow.
There's a lot of people don't know about the Women in Black, but they're sort of like the Men in Black in the sense that they wear black outfits, but it's usually like a business suit type outfit, but they have the same sort of emotionless look on their face, the same very white skin. But whereas the Men in Black, whereas the Men in Black look like emaciated ghouls that's just been dug up out the ground, literally, that's how they look. I mean, the Women in Black, like I said, the Women in Black are always described as incredibly hot. That's the only thing way I can put it.
Wow, so they're beautiful women in black.
Yeah, they're beautiful. Yeah, very often like statuesque, like 6 feet tall.
Wow,
whereas the Men in Black are like 5 foot to 5'5". But what's interesting is that most of the people who've had encounters with the Women in Black get this really strange vibe that they get from the Men in Black, that you need to get as far away from this person as possible. It's like everything about the way the person looks is in contrast to the feeling that they get from them.
So it's in contrast to the true nature of what they are, it sounds like.
Yes, exactly.
People are feeling that. Much like the dark-eyed children, which I know you've heard about. Do you think there's some relationship there?
Yeah, I actually do. I mean, that's an interesting angle. A good friend of mine, David Weatherly, wrote a really good book on the Black-Eyed Children, which I would recommend to everybody. But there are a lot of parallels between the Black-Eyed Children and the Men in Black, because the Men in Black typically come out at night. They're generally in groups of at least two, and they always wear fedora hats. Now, the Black-Eyed Children generally come out at night. They're pale and skinny, and they wear hoodies, and they dress in black hoodies. So everything about them is pretty much the same. They're almost like a younger version of the Men in Black. And like the Men in Black, they always try and find a way into the house, but they always ask, can we come in? Can we use the phone? Have you got any food we can have? But, we've lost a pet. Can we come in and see if it's in your backyard? There's always some reason they want to find a way in. Now, again, if there's like an occult angle to this, one of the theories is that, they get into your house, then sort of metaphorically they get into their grips into you as well, and, they can provoke havoc. Like, for example, this whole idea of using you as almost like a battery where you become an energy source for them and you drain dry, that kind of thing. It's
that is very much like the vampire.
But the idea is if you don't allow them into your personal space or energy field, there's no way for them to do it. But they have to be invited.
Excuse me. How many of the people that have been involved with these different things have been involved with electronics in some form, whether it be computers, radio, anything of that nature?
I'm not honestly sure about that, but I do know that a lot of the people, I do know some people in the 50s when the UFO field started up, a lot of those people were claimed to have actually made contact with these entities via radio, like ham radio type things. We often think that if you're going to contact aliens, they're going to come down and abduct you or walk out of a UFO or sending signals to other star systems. But back in the 50s, there were a lot of people who claimed to have picked up these sort of weird disembodied voices on like ham radio things out in the California desert or Arizona or New Mexico, and claimed to have conversations with them. So that's the whole radio angle was quite prevalent in the 50s.
That is so interesting. And in the chat room, they're saying they want to know: are you of the mind that these not black-eyed children, but the Men in Black, could they be robots? That's the question.
Yeah, well, that is a good question. I don't think they're robots in the sense that we think of like metallic jerky robots, that sort of thing. What I do believe, though, is that if you look at the way our technology is progressing, if that's the right word, with things like gene splicing and DNA manipulation, I actually don't think it's a stretch to say that one day we could be able to build or actually like grow biological robots. You grow a body to order, and it's built to perform a specific task. It sounds bizarre, but I could see that happening one day. So I don't rule out the idea that somebody else could have done something similar. In other words, not build a robot in a factory, but grow organs, grow the skin, the cells, and then it's all patchwork together, or not even patchwork. It may just literally be grown in a tank. As horrible as it sounds, research has actually been done for a long while, and I think it's a good thing that it hasn't actually been achieved, where the whole idea of taking a baby from, when the sperm fertilizes the egg, and then literally growing it in a tank. Research has actually been done that for like the entire 9-month process. It would be grown outside of the mother. And I think that's going down a dangerous path. But even more dangerous path would be if you could design or create a creature like the Men in Black, and their brain wouldn't function like ours. It would be just programmed to perform one specific task, like to threaten people. And that might be why so many of these Men in Black, when the people question them, they start to stutter and stammer and they seem confused. In other words, they may not even be self-aware of what they are. If you imagine you're created and grown and the only thing in your mind is this program, you wouldn't have a full understanding or even an appreciation of what you are. You wouldn't even understand the concept of you being an individual. That might explain some of the really strange aspects of these Men in Black encounters.
When you're talking about the women in black as well, that they're taller and they're more statuesque and more attractive, could they be the, quote, leaders of the black element, the Men in Black and the children in black?
Yeah, they could be. I mean, there's all sorts of ways we can look at this. And the big problem is that I think it's like with so many aspects of the UFO phenomenon, we're only seeing certain parts of it. Mm-hmm. And when you only see a part of the picture, it's difficult to put all the pieces together. But the one thing I am absolutely sure of is that the Men in Black, the women in black, and the black-eyed children, and also these other phenomena, like, for example, the shadow people. Mm-hmm. The shadow people, there's a subcategory of the shadow people. For people who haven't heard of them, they're sort of, imagine a shadow that could move around, like a one-dimensional shadow, and could, it's actually quite lethal. But in many of the cases, there's this subcategory known as the Hat Man. In other words, it's like a shadowy form, one-dimensional, but wearing, again, like an old-style hat. And, I mean, again, if you punch into a search engine, Hat Man plus UFO or paranormal, you'll find dozens of stories. And so, again, I think the Hat Man and the shadow people are part of this as well. I think they're all somehow interconnected, and they all seem quite hostile to the human race, and at least a part of it seems to be almost, as I said, like using us as an energy source.
That's interesting. I have seen the shadow people here.
Oh, wow.
On this property. I did not experience them as dangerous to me or any human, but they appeared to me to be very drawn to any big energetic transition. So I happened to see them because I was very ill at the time on death's door, literally, and that's when I suddenly locked into seeing them. And there were quite a few of them, but that's what they seem to be interested in, is that energetic transition. So the fact that they may be interdimensional beings is not, I think, too far from the truth. Mm-hmm. But there's something else here that you mentioned with these Men in Black that I find, again, very curious. And I'm going to go back to the television host, because he also had an experience he recounted with Men in Black after he received this tape from the airline pilot. And he said they came to his door, and there were 3 of them, just like you said. Mm-hmm. And he noticed that they were talking in a stilted manner. So he began talking to them in words that made no sense. So he would string words together like airplane, radio, walking, and they would just look at him, and it was like they could not compute anything of what he was saying. It was almost like something out of Star Trek, when you try to confuse the enemy, and that's what he was doing. But he said he found it easy to do with them, and they finally left, just totally frustrated with him because he kept doing that. He wouldn't use a sentence. He would not say a sentence, just pick different words.
Yeah, well, that's interesting you said that it wouldn't compute, because some people have actually managed to get the MIB to leave on their terms by putting them in a position where they sort of turn the tables and the people start asking questions, or they offer them something to drink or eat, and the Men in Black, if food's put on the table or drinks put on the table, they just stare at it as if they don't even understand what it is or what they're supposed to do with it even. And then often they sort of make their excuses and just get up and leave. It's almost like you've put a glitch into their processes or whatever.
Yeah, not part of that program at that moment in time.
Yes, exactly, right. Yeah.
Here comes the monkey wrench. So if anybody in our audience gets a visit from the 3 Men in Black, then you can speak nonsensically and you're going to leave. So that's good. But even better, don't answer the door.
And don't invite them in, for sure.
And yes, don't invite them in. Goodness. Well, I've got more questions from the chat room, and if you have a little bit more time, Nick, I'll go ahead and ask you if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
So let's go back and revisit this idea of presidents. And some presidents, it appears, did have more access to information about extraterrestrials than others. And there were stories reported on a recent television show that just said that actually Bill Clinton, as you mentioned, had very little access to this for whatever reason. But Jimmy Carter had access, and they actually, when he was given more information, somebody said they found him sitting in his office crying his eyes out about it. And then there was Kennedy, who there have been rumors, quite a few rumors, that he was killed, he was assassinated because he was going to bring out this information about UFOs. So the question in the chat room is, have you heard anything about the Kennedy connection?
Yeah, actually, I've got a whole chapter in the book on the links between UFOs and the Kennedy assassination, and it sounds bizarre, but there actually are dozens of links when you look into it. For example, one of the people who was identified as one of the potential gunmen in Kennedy's killing was a man named Fred Chrisman. Fred Chrisman was a guy who had a lot of very weird and even to this day unclear links with the world of intelligence and espionage. And he was actually involved in a famous UFO event in 1947 at a place called Maury Island in Washington State, where he was involved in the recovery of a lot of strange wreckage from reportedly an exploded UFO. And Chrisman actually turned up years later in the Kennedy assassination, to the extent that Jim Garrison, the district attorney in New Orleans, who was played by Kevin Costner in the JFK movie, he actually came to believe, Jim Garrison, came to believe that Fred Chrisman, who found this wreckage, or was at least involved in the handling of it at Maury Island, he came to believe that Chrisman was one of the gunmen at Dealey Plaza. Turns out that Chrisman was also associated with a man named Guy Bannister. And Guy Bannister is also portrayed in the JFK movie by Ed Asner. And back in 1947, Guy Bannister was a special agent with the FBI, and he was involved in many UFO investigations for the FBI. And his files on the investigations he looked into have surfaced now through the Freedom of Information Act. And so the theory is that certain people and players who were intimately involved in the UFO subject from the early years, like Bannister and Chrisman, became in later years part of this sort of UFO shadow agency or group or cabal that was overseeing the UFO subject even by the time when Kennedy was in power. And Kennedy was looking for the answers and wasn't getting them. So that's why so many people linked to the subject may have been involved in the assassination. Now, it seems that, people have told us that Kennedy, certainly in the time leading up to his death, was actively trying to open doors to find out what the truth was about UFOs. In other words, he didn't know, and he couldn't get the answers himself. And so what happened was that he started personally to try and find the answers. Now, what makes this so kind of intriguing is that Kennedy was shot on November the 22nd, 1963 in Dealey Plaza, as we know. And but the day before, November the 21st, he was already in Texas. And on that day, the 21st, he flew to Brooks Air Force Base, where he opened, he did a dedication to the opening of a new wing at the base. And it was a wing that was going to deal with the subject at the time was called space medicine. Bear in mind, this was the early years of the space race, and nobody really knew what long-term exposure would do if you're in space and there's no gravity. What sort of effect would it have on your organs if you're just floating around in no gravity all the time? Would it affect your blood pressure? Would it affect the strength of your heartbeat? Would you get like vertigo and things like this? And would it make your bones weak if you're not standing for long periods or sitting and using your legs at all? So that was the whole idea of this new wing, to study how we might physically be affected in space. Now, it turns out that while Kennedy was at Brooks Air Force Base, he had a behind-closed-doors meeting with a General Theodore Bedwell. And it turns out that Major Theodore Bedwell actually held a major military position in the summer of 1947, when the Roswell event occurred, at a place called Wright Field, which later became known as Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And it was at Wright Field that the bodies from Roswell were reportedly taken in the summer of 1947, where Bedwell was based. And, of course, because Bedwell held a major medical position at right field, he would have arguably been one of the main primary people to have seen the bodies.
That's
and
right.
Then we find just the day before he shot, Kennedy was having a behind closed doors meeting with him at Brooks Air Force Base to discuss who knows what, you know.
Oh my
God! And that's just sort of the tip of the iceberg. There are numerous other people as well, all linked with the Kennedy assassination and all linked with UFOs.
Yes, it is
amazing. Absolutely
an amazing trail of people. And now here's another question about the Grenada Treaty. Is that what it was called? That's what you're saying in the chat room. That actually our government made this treaty with one group of extraterrestrials, or maybe more, to allow them to abduct people, humans, and in return they would get technology. What are your thoughts on that? They want to know.
Well, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of stories like this about, us using alien technology, whether from crashed UFOs or even donated UFOs. That's one of the theories that's been put forward with certain things going on at Area 51. And clearly we have a lot of abductions. I think there are enough stories on record about sort of us trying to figure out how alien technology works and reverse engineering it, et cetera, to suggest we have got technologies and we are trying to actively figure out how they work. But the only thing that always puzzles me about this sort of story is if these entities are so powerful and they can come from however many light years away, perform all these incredible maneuvers and abduct people in the middle of the night, why would they even need to enter into a treaty in the first place when they could
That's a good question.
do whatever they wanted?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, so I actually do think, I believe abductions are real, and I think there's a good chance we are trying to replicate alien technology, but I don't personally understand the logic, as I said, of why a treaty would be needed. If we find alien technology crashed in the desert, we are going to try and understand it. And if aliens want to abduct us, they're going to do that. But again, I don't see why the two need to come together to do that. If we find their wreckage, we can just go ahead and do it. Mm-hmm. They can just abduct people. So,
well, then there's nothing to stop them from doing what they want, and we certainly can't stop them.
No, and I kind of find the whole image a bit absurd of, an alien sitting down with the president, and they've got this contract. What are they going to do? Sign it with a pen?
You never know, Nick.
Well, you don't know, but I mean, to me, that would be, I can almost. I mean, I'm not poking fun at, but just the idea of, the aliens there with their lawyers going over the contract. I mean, it just sounds absurd. You know what I mean?
Well, it does, and the only thing that in my mind might give this any credence, I mean, of course, I grew up on Star Trek, and the fact that they have to follow their own rules and regulations throughout the galaxy and being part of a universal federation or whatever, and possibly that was one of the things they had to do. That's the only way I can put these two things together logically. But who knows? I mean, as you mentioned, and as you write about in your book, there is so much obfuscation. There is so much going on here. I mean, you mentioned the men in black that are really men in black, and then somebody else is kind of taking the concept and running with it to cover their own tracks. There's just too many things going on and not enough really good, grounded information that can allow us to get to the truth. I mean, you've done a great job with this book.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, thanks. But the only thing I would say is that, for all of us, the way I look at it, everybody in the subject, we're all doing our own thing to get the information out. Whether it's you with your radio show, me doing books, somebody who's a TV producer, somebody who's a blogger, and people who go to conferences. And more importantly, what I consider the most important people are the witnesses, because without the witnesses, we don't have anything to go on. So I think collectively, we have got a massive amount of information, but we still are faced with a lot of strands and threads that we're still trying to put together. And I think the more collectively we all push and work together, we'll get there. But it's how we get there. I actually think if the truth does sort of come tumbling out, it may be through a mistake, like a bureaucratical mistake, where something gets declassified in a document by mistake, or something happens where it's out of the control of this shadow group, and I think that's what they fear, and that's why these deaths occur. It's the fear of something finally falling out of their control, if you like.
And do you think, is it possible that someday their hand is going to be forced, that the extraterrestrials may say, we're going to reveal ourselves, period?
Well, yeah, that's a good point, because one of the problems we have with the UFO subject isn't just that there's blanket secrecy undertaken, controlled by humans. The phenomenon itself acts in a very stealthy way as well. And so, for that reason, we're faced with two corners of secrecy, but from very different angles. But yeah, things could change overnight if an ultimatum was made, to whoever's hiding this, that you will disclose within the next 3 days, or we will disclose. Mm-hmm. That could actually happen. And I really don't think there would be any way of stopping that. It's like you watch films like Independence Day and, these gigantic alien armadas, and, we always beat them in the end, and the troops go off with a cigar or whatever. But
right.
I honestly don't, if they wanted to show themselves, whether they're friendly, hostile, or if they wanted to do whatever they wanted to do, I honestly don't think we would stand any kind of chance at all of even denting them slightly. I think they're so incredibly advanced, and also very weirdly advanced in some ways we don't necessarily fully understand, that it would be kind of like we would be the equivalent of a fly being swatted. And the other alternative would be, it'd be like a parent looking after a baby. We would be helpless without the help of the parents. It's kind of like that. I just don't think we stand any chance, good or bad, of preventing them doing whatever it is they decide to do.
I agree. That sounds absolutely
true. But it might be good. The one positive thing about all this is, for all the years that encounters have gone on, abductions have occurred, and yes, there have been some sinister cases, but overall, nobody's done the equivalent of nuked us or wiped us out, and they could easily have done that before we developed, like, rocketry and atomic missiles and chemical weapons, to where we might stand a bit of a chance of fighting them off. So, in other words, the very positive thing is that for all the years this has been going on, nothing has happened to us,
That's a good point. It's true. If they wanted to stage a massive invasion, could have been done. Yeah, could have been done easily. Absolutely. Well, I just have to mention one other thing, too, that during this time, I don't know if you've heard this as clearly as I have, but probably, there's been somebody on the line who's breathing heavily into the phone. Have you guys heard that?
No.
Okay. I did at my end, and I know it's not you, Nick. I know it's not you, Patricia, and I know it's not me. So we definitely have a visitor from somewhere that's been listening to us and breathing into the phone. I hear you.
Well, they probably think of us as children compared to what their knowledge is.
Yeah, and I don't know who this breather is, but if they're advanced or not, but we hear you. Yes.
Well, there's a lot of strange stories with telephone interference and strange noises and hang-up phone calls in the middle of the night. A lot of researchers get that in relation to the Men in Black mystery. But again, I think, as I said, when people say, well, it's, people in today's world, people say it's the NSA. Obviously, that's what they say. But again, I really don't think it is. I think all these groups, for all we hear about like NSA and the CIA, I just don't think they're the people. I really think it's a shadow group, and we need to understand the concept of a massive program to hide the UFO subject that has been taken out of official control, and that is run by a kind of group that, even for us, it's difficult to get our minds around the concept of how it operates and under what circumstances.
This is just great stuff, Nick.
Just fascinating. Absolutely
just
fascinating.
Just a great show and great stuff that you've been discussing with us tonight. And again, for everybody out there, go get this book. You won't be able to put it down.
Yes.
It's called Close Encounters of the Fatal Kind. It is written by Nick Redfern, who's a best-selling author. You can get this on Amazon.com. Guarantee you're going to love this book. There's just so much thought-provoking material in it. And, Nick, you're a great guest. Thank you so much for coming on Supernatural Girlz tonight. Just totally enjoyed this.
Definitely on the show. I'm always, appreciative when people want me on the show. And, we had a good time. And, I'm always happy to.
Definitely had a good time. Yes.
Oh,
did you, Patricia?
For sure. Totally fascinating, Nick. Totally fascinating.
All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much. And please keep us posted about your next book about the women in black. We're going to have you back. We want to hear all about that, too. So thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in tonight to this discussion. And, again, with Nick Redfern, he is the best-selling author of Close Encounters of the Fatal Kind. Run out and get that today. You won't be disappointed. It's a great book. And, everyone, don't forget to also, please, go to supernaturalgirls.com, sign up on our website, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook. You will be amazed at what we're going to be sharing with you over the next few weeks. More of our adventures with the Skoll Project, more unusual, very weird photographs that we're going to be sending out. Don't miss it. It's going to be great. We've got another great show coming up next week. So thank you, everybody, for joining us, and take care. Don't answer the door if the men in black come to your door.
And
just
do not offer them
it.
anything to eat.
That's right. Okay, everybody. Have fun. We will be talking with you next week.
Good night.
Thanks for listening. Tune in next week for another radio adventure with Supernatural